What's up, folks, and welcome back to Dyce Reacts, where we are staying in Poland tonight. We are going to be checking out 7 more things that shocked me in Poland. Very much excited to check this one out. We ain't going to waste no more time. We're just going to get right into it, folks. We're going to get right into it. Oh yeah.
So the first one on my list is graveyards, and they are definitely different than in the US. So for example, in Poland, graveyards seem to be basically stuffed to the brim, and multiple people can be buried in just one grave. And so this was definitely shocking to me, seeing a graveyard and then seeing no grass anywhere at all in sight, but instead just seeing tons of graves stacked basically upon each other. This was definitely shocking to me. I'm not used to that, because here in the States, there is usually just 1 or 2 people buried in a single grave area, you know, like a couple or something like that, or maybe a mother and like a child who died with the mother or something like that. And then usually there's like a spacing in between the graves, but in Poland it seems like that's not really the case for most grave sites, whereas in the US you can usually find lots of spacing in between graves. And I guess there's really just a spacing issue or like a land issue, because you know there's around 38 million to 40 million Poles in Poland, so I guess it gets really packed and people have to find a way to really just pack in the bodies in a sense as well. So yeah, this was something that was definitely shocking to me, and something that I'm not really used to seeing in the US, for example. Alright, so the second one kind of has to deal with driving and parking in streets and things like that. So the first one I wanted to talk about is whenever you're crossing the street in Poland and you're just walking across the street, you better make sure that it is a zebra crossing and that the light says green, that you can walk across that street. In most cases, sometimes it's not and there's just a zebra crossing, but if you're not doing that, apparently you can get pretty big fines. So I don't know if I've shared this story before, but whenever I was in Warsaw with my girlfriend for the first time, we were holding hands and we were walking across the street, and it was just like a random street with no zebra crossing or anything like that, and I all of a sudden start walking and I'm like tugging her and she's like pulling back and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was trying to cross the street and she was telling me that you can't do that. Instead, we had to walk like 10 feet down the road to the zebra crossing and then just do it there. And whenever I was asking why does she have to do this, why do you have to walk to the zebra crossing, she was basically saying that if you don't, you get a strict fine, and no one does it. No one will cross the street. And that's true. I mean, I've rarely seen people actually even crossing the street, and if you do, it's like some big thing, you know, it's like, wow, someone's crossing the street, you know, it's kind of like that. And this was really shocking to me. I mean, even in cities like New York or, you know, Washington DC, Baltimore, wherever, you can just cross the street. If there's no cars coming, you can just cross the street and like you're, you know, just use your own judgment. And it is a jaywalking violation in the US. It is you would get a fine if someone actually cared, but I've never once had anyone care or even heard of anyone getting a fine or anything like that as well. So yeah, before everyone in the comments says, you know, why would you do that? It's just chaos in the streets and things like that. Well, I hate to break it to you, but everyone does that in New York City, Baltimore, every single East Coast city that I've been to, everyone does it and no one cares. So just be prepared for that. And if you want to, you can do that when you come over to the States. You can just cross the street and like, it's not going to be a problem. Let me know what you guys think about that and how you feel. I'm guessing most of you guys are going to disagree with me and you're not going to like it, but it is what it is, right? All right, so
I mean, it's not just a US issue. I would think this happens in basically all around the world. People just have no patience whatsoever. In my country, it's the same thing. I mean, you see that all the time. It could be less in different countries. It varies. But I would think this is almost like a worldwide issue per se, unless countries have some really strict measures in place. Some countries I can think of, but I'd rather not say. I've never been there, but at the top of my head, I know some countries are very strict in laws in general. So I would assume that maybe on that side of the law, when it comes to traffic, it would be somewhat similar. I don't know, I'm just saying.
Going along with this is parking on curbs. I've never once seen a car park on curbs in the US at all. And whenever I was in Poland, I was so shocked. I was like, holy hell, a car is driving onto a curb. And you know, most of these curbs aren't really too high. They're like, you know, that high. So a car can really easily get onto the curb. And whenever I was in Poland, we were in some cars that parked onto the curbs, and you can just feel the whole car hit the curb pretty hard as it goes onto the curb. And there's no way that is good for the shocks or the axle of the car over time. I just can't see that, you know, as a okay thing. And going along with that, I can't imagine the transmissions in Poland lasting that long either, because whenever I was in the cities, people were definitely slamming the pedals quite hard, and I can't imagine the transmissions or the brakes even lasting that long either. And maybe that's just a city thing as well, because whenever I was in the mountains like in Zakopane, people were driving, you know, calmly, I guess you could say, and they were very chill there, and it was really refreshing actually, because compared to driving in Warsaw where everyone is driving like mad, you know, it was kind of really refreshing to be in the mountains where people are laid back in a sense. And going along with that, whenever you pull up to a red traffic light in Poland, the light will go from red to yellow to then green, which is something that doesn't happen in the US. I honestly wish it would, because then you could at least prepare and put the car into gear if it's a manual, and you know, you could at least prepare to be driving, and it would probably speed up the entire process as well of traffic and all of that. Whereas, you know, in the US, that's not really a thing at all. Alright, so the third one on this list is drinks that are not refrigerated. So this may come to a shock to some Americans, especially from the South, but you know, Polish people aren't really into drinking liquids with ice, it seems like. I don't know, there's something about ice that I really appreciate and I definitely like, and it's just I'm used to it. I'm American, I'm just used to it. And whenever you go to a restaurant in the US, for example, you know, you have a cup and it's like you get more ice than actual liquid in the cup, and you know, I'm just okay with it over time. And I know like some Polish people don't like this, because my girlfriend especially doesn't, and instead she would rather just have a glass with cold liquid, but I don't know. So yeah, it was just kind of a bit shocking to me that, you know, not all of the time people are drinking cold drinks or drinks with lots of ice in them. And I know this is gonna sound weird to a lot of Polish people out there, and probably Europeans as well, but it's just something that I'm used to being an American, is having a drink with ice in it always. And most refrigerators here will have a water option, you know, where you can basically just get water, and some of those are, you know, already pre-filtered, like they have filters built into the refrigerator, and then you can also get ice from there as well. Alright, so the fourth one is the amount of churches, and honestly I thought that where I live there's just tons of churches, like there's like 4 or 5 churches in my area, but no, that's actually not the case. And you can see some vlogs of areas that I've gone to in Poland, and I'm like, oh, there's a church, there's a church, there's a church, there's a church, you know, it's like every other street there's a new church, and it's kind of crazy. I mean, churches are definitely a big thing in Poland, and I'm curious as to what the revenue that churches make in Poland are, because I'm guessing that they're tax-free just like in the US, and they are probably making tons of money. But anyways, I'm not going into that, but more so that the amount of churches is...
What was the more dominant religion per se in Poland? Like I would say like from the 1800s and onwards. Give me a time lapse basically, because this is interesting.
Something that definitely shocked me, because you know, I knew that Poland was religious and, you know, Catholic and all of that, but I didn't think that there was going to be churches at nearly every single block, you know, down the street. So yeah, it's just something that definitely shocked me. It was pretty interesting to see whenever I was there. Alright, so the fifth one is the unpredictability of weather, and because whenever I was in Poland, for especially like in the summertime, I just remember it being all of a sudden it's dry, hot, and then next thing you know, raining, and then next thing you know, dry and hot, like immediately after, and then followed by raining again, like these quick little bursts of like rain followed by sun. And it was just really shocking to me, and I think this also varies a lot more in the fall and the springtime. And yeah, it was just definitely different than what I'm used to, because you know, for the most part in the US, at least in the eastern side of the US, it is the same weather every single day. So it's mostly hot and like partly cloudy, and then it will just downpour towards the end of the day, and there's like a huge thunderstorm, and that's usually every single day. And this was something that I was definitely not used to in Poland, because I would go onto a weather app, check the weather stations, what they were predicting for the day, and all of a sudden it would say it wasn't raining for the day, for example, and next thing you know, I would be soaked by the time I got back to my girlfriend's house. And yeah, it was just something I wasn't used to in Poland, was the unpredictability of weather. Going along with that was, I remember one time we were about to go driving somewhere, and on the car there was a film of like tan to gray dust. You know, I touched it with my finger. I'm like, what is this? It's not pollen, because, you know, pollen is typically yellow or green, you know, around that color. And basically my girlfriend told me it was sand, and I was just thinking sand. And I was, you know, thinking from Wenduf, the desert in Poland, but no, it's actually from the Sahara in Africa, which is crazy to think of, that sand from the Sahara will blow onto cars and things like that in Poland and in Europe. That is,
I mean, I'm getting goosebumps you saying that there, because even here we have sometimes on the forecast that we're gonna have sand, like it's gonna be dusty, and all those dust coming from the Sahara. I mean, that's how large the Sahara Desert is. I mean, it's amazing. It affects so many areas across the globe. It's insane. I will have to find a more in-depth, not per se a video, but do a little research to see how far across the world that it stretches in terms of like countries being affected to some degree per se. Because this is just insane.
is definitely shocking to me, because we don't have that issue in the States. And even though we have sand deserts in the US, we don't have this issue where the dust will just blow over to, for example, all the way over to the East Coast. And I'm pretty sure that that has happened before, but it is not a regular occurrence, for example, or happens every single year. But it is something that was definitely shocking to hear, is that sand from the Sahara will blow over all the way to Poland. That is just crazy. And I even looked this up, and what I saw was that the sand from the Sahara will also blow over all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, all the way to Brazil, and go into the Amazon rainforest, and somehow that benefits the rainforest in some way. I don't know, some animal science person probably knows, but yeah, it was just definitely weird and shocking to hear about this. Alright, so the sixth one was drinking, and honestly I thought most people in Poland drank, and call me an ignorant American, yes I know, but you know, all we hear is these stereotypes about, for example, Slavic countries, you know, just drinking like vodka and things like that. You know, for example, like here in Russia, vodka drink you, and you know, all of that stuff. So there's just all of this popularity that we think is in Slavic countries with like vodka and all of this. And while, you know, vodka and drinking is much more than in the US, for example, it definitely wasn't as much as what I thought it was in Poland. And going along with that, I thought that everyone would be drinking, you know, a beer or alcohol, you know, at the table whenever we're eating dinner, and that's not really the case at all. It's not really a normal occurrence. And you know, for example, on Christmas, you know, normally you're drinking shots and things like that, and yes, you are drinking, but it wasn't as much as I thought it would be, especially for normal dinner occurrences and things like that. And comparing this to the US, I don't remember any of my family members ever drinking at the table, even on Christmas Day. I mean, maybe some wine, but like that's even it. I don't know, maybe it's just my family, they're not really drinkers, but yeah. So it was definitely a bit shocking to me, even seeing, you know, shots and stuff like that at the table. But yeah, for the most part, Poland is not really a drinking country that I thought it would be. Alright, so the last one on this list is the kebab, and this was something that definitely shocked me whenever I was in Poland. So my girlfriend was talking and hyping up what's called the kebab, and she was, you know, explaining it to me, and she was just saying there was all of these kebab restaurants everywhere, and that she wanted to take me to one and see what I thought of it, you know, because I really like Mediterranean food. I like, you know, just food from other cultures and things like that. And so whenever she was talking about it, all I could think of was a shish kebab. So a shish kebab, or a kebab in the US, is basically like chopped up meats, green peppers, onions, things like that, all on a stick with, you know, some seasoning, and then you just put it on the grill or in the oven, and then it'll just cook, and then you can basically just eat the stuff right off of the stick. And that's all I was thinking of whenever my girlfriend was talking about the kebab. And basically whenever I got there, then I realized that it was not, it was the sandwich. So it was something that definitely shocked me, as well as the popularity of it. I mean, you can find a kebab restaurant everywhere in Poland. I mean, you don't have to go far to find one. Polish people really like kebabs, which I'm guessing that type of food is Turkish, I'm pretty sure. And so yeah, that's something that definitely shocked me, was the popularity of kebabs in Poland, and just kebabs in general. So
yes, this was very interesting. As always, this guy always delivers some very interesting, thought-provoking things as well. He made a good point in terms of some of those countries, especially a lot of European countries. We tend to think, especially where I'm from, we tend to think that vodka is the drink of those countries. We don't think of anything else. That's the first thing, well, at least for me, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Especially if the country is a very cold country, especially if it's, I wouldn't say year round, but if it's severely cold in the winter time. We think about vodka, we think about it. People are going to be drinking vodka to warm themselves up because of the coolness. So that could be what sparks that thought. But he's spot on with that one, because I would think vodka would be very popular in the drinking in Poland and drinking in general. He said about the climate. It almost sounds like it's almost part of like the tropics, because in the Caribbean we have a lot of that, like scattered showers. It could be rain for like an hour, 2 hours later it's so sunny, the whole place is dried up, and you even forgot that it was raining earlier. You forget that. That's how fast the weather changes in the tropics. So it's very interesting. Poland is like that. I wouldn't think that Poland would be that way. I myself have to look that up, because that is interesting as hell, come to think about it. Yeah, there's so many things I have to research myself, go more in depth, but I'm learning a lot watching some of those videos, especially those individuals who take time to figure certain things out, or to observe as they on the journey in Poland. If you want to see that long drawn outro that I do, hit me up on Dyce Reacts, where I do music reactions. This is where I'm going to be making my exit. Until next time, peace out.